Resolution 2773, the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, was introduced in the House of Representatives by Representative Debbie Dingell from Michigan and Jeff Fortenberry from Nebraska. But worth noting and exciting for us here in Oregon, Representative DeFazio was one of the original co-sponsors. I think there were 7 co-sponsors with Representative Dingell, and DeFazio was one of those. So we're really grateful for his support for this opportunity. So the bill was introduced less than a month ago, and it's a really exciting opportunity. The high level, what it does is that it dedicates $1.3 billion annually for implementation of the state wildlife action plans. And that is dedicated as it's not an annual appropriation. So should this bill pass in its current form, that would be money that's available every year, which is really exciting. It also dedicates $97.5 million annually for tribal wildlife conservation, and takes 10% of the total amount for conservation innovation grants. So that would be about $130 million a year for competitive conservation innovation grants, which is also a huge new opportunity for the conservation community. So all of this would be administered through the Wildlife and Sportfish Restoration Program at the Fish and Wildlife Service. And so should the bill pass, it'll be a few months where the Fish and Wildlife Service works through the rules and sets up a process to apportion this money to the states. So the legislation has a long list of what the money shall and may be used for. And so I've summarized that here. This is almost directly from the bill. I've just tried to simplify it to fit on the slide here. But essentially the apportionment each state gets from the Recovering America's Wildlife Act must be used on existing wildlife and conservation restoration programs, new programs, and all of that needs to be in line with our wildlife action plan, which is the Oregon conservation strategy here in Oregon. So that's that big overarching conservation blueprint. We will use this money for implementing the actions identified in that plan. We can also use it for updating, revising, and enhancing that plan. And this is new in the legislation this year. We must spend at least 15% of our apportionment from the Recovering America's Wildlife Act on recovery of threatened and endangered species. And that's federally listed or state listed threatened and endangered species. There's also this list of what we may use the money on. We may use it up to 15% of our apportionment on conservation education and wildlife associated recreation. We can use it for joint projects with other states, other governments, thinking of migratory birds as an example there. We can use it on managing, controlling, and preventing invasive species, diseases, and other key conservation issues like that. And we may use it for law enforcement as it relates specifically to species of greatest conservation need. And this phrase, species of greatest conservation need, appears throughout the legislation. And here in Oregon, that is can be generalized to be our strategy species, or the species that we've identified in that plan. So in Oregon, of that $1.3 billion a year, it'll be somewhere between $23 and $25 million per year that would come to the Department of Fish and Wildlife. That's based on an apportionment formula. It's in the bill, a pretty complicated calculation that takes into account the land area of a state, the current population of a state, and the proportion of all federally listed species in the country that live in our state. And so that is how they're going to calculate this. That's why we have a range here, because they're still working on how exactly that will work. There's also a bonus built in here for states that include plants on their wildlife action plan. And if you look at OregonConservationStrategy.com, there are plants listed there. So we would be eligible for this bonus. So of that $23 to $25 million per year, in order to really use it, there is a 25% match requirement, which would come to $7.5 to $8.5 or so million per year in non-federal match that we will need to bring to the table in order to access these funds. So putting that all together, that's a total impact of $61 to $64 million per biennium that would come to Oregon for conservation should the Recovering America's Wildlife Act pass and we're able to match all of those funds. And so I think the really important question is, what are we going to do with that? And the answer is implement the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which is a really broad, high-level answer. And getting into the details of that, in the past, as we've talked about Recovering America's Wildlife Act, we've focused on the detailed recommendations of the Alternative Funding Task Force. And so that's this report here. If you remember that, you can Google this title and it'll bring up the full report. But it had recommendations for about $87 million per biennium of new programs, much of that to expand our conservation work and connecting Oregonians to the outdoors. And so we kind of had that blueprint ready to go of what we would want to spend that on. That report's now 5 years old. It doesn't include the new proposed habitat division. So the department is working right now on a new vision for how we would use these funds, how we intend to generate the match for it, and what that could look like over the next few months. So I'm hoping to engage all of you in that process throughout the rest of 2021. So this is a great opportunity, a new piece of legislation. Here's how you can help. We want to ask our representatives to become co-sponsors. In the last Congress, 4 out of the 5 of Oregon's representatives were co-sponsors of the bill. And it did pass the House last session as part of the transportation package, and all 5 of our representatives did vote for it. So we're in a good position to be able to get all 5 of our members on as co-sponsors, and that's kind of the best we as Oregon's conservation community can do beyond influencing the delegations of other states on this bill. Also talk to our senators about it. The next step is likely to be introduction of the same bill in the Senate to try to move them both forward at the same time to move to passage sometime this year, hopefully. And if you don't follow a lot of federal legislation, we really have 2 years. So this Congress ends at the end of 2022. And so that's really the deadline for passing this bill in this Congress, but we'd like to do it this year. So make sure our senators know about it, make sure they know that you're interested in having their support for it when it is introduced. And then you can join the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife, and their website is here. It's ournatureusa.com. That's the national alliance that is supporting this bill, building a coalition back in DC to push our members of Congress to pass this. So I think that's what I wanted to share with you all today. Hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll sort of have some glossy materials to share with you about it, but there's a lot of great things on ournatureusa.com. And so that is the update on Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And I can't see the chat right now. Now I can. And so there's a couple questions in here. Okay, so I see Peggy's question. Can the match be other than general fund and in-kind work? So yes, the match can be, it's pretty broad. And I'll go back to the bill language. It actually says that it can be any funding that is not from the Department of the Interior or the Department of Agriculture. So some of our other federal funds could be used as match. ODF&W's other funds could be used as match. In-kind work, volunteer time can all be used as match. So pretty much all of the ways that we match our other federal funding sources through the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program can be used as match. And so a lot of state agencies are concerned about this size of match that we are going to need to generate to access these federal funds, but we feel like that's a good problem to have. And there's a huge body of conservation work going out there that we'd be really happy to leverage as match opportunity in time and in money. Danielle's question, when will we need to have the matching funds by? I think that's a great question, and it'll be, we need to match it to spend it. And so we don't need to necessarily reach that threshold and say, okay, we have $8 million this year, so we can access all of that federal fund. And so we can match it as we go, if that makes sense, Danielle. And so if the bill were to pass this year, we would want to try in that federal fiscal year to generate all of it And we can do that through specific projects. If there's volunteer work through that project, there's pass-through grants that we do. And so it'll be operating on a federal calendar year, the way that our other federal grants do. Are there other questions? Concerns, opportunities? Are people as excited as I am? All right, well, that was easy. Thank you all for your interest in this, and looking forward to bringing this money home and working with everyone to figure out how we spend it. So next on the agenda, we've got Commissioner Mark Labhart and Nick Myatt, who I'm happy to introduce as ODF&W's relatively new East Region Manager. So welcome to both of you, and I think Commissioner Labhart was going to start.
Thanks, Davia. Welcome, everybody. And I'm just as excited about the Renewable for America's Wildlife as Davia. It's potentially a game changer for the Habitat Division and conservation. So it's we got to make sure it passes. This will be the third time in this Congress that we've got a shot at it. So I've always heard that third time's the charm. So we'll see. So let's keep our fingers crossed. So Nick and I are here today to give you a briefing on something that a lot of us think is a really cool thing. It is the Minum acquisition project, which is essentially about a 15,000 acre potential acquisition of some critical wildlife habitat in Northeast Oregon. I think it's the largest acquisition in the department's history. Nick, myself, and Deputy Director, Hearn, have been on a Zoom road trip for about the last month, talking to county commissioners, representatives, senators, and stakeholders about this effort. It's moving down a pathway toward completion. It still has a ways to go. It's got to be brought before the commission for review and hopefully approval, and then legislature for authorization. And it's a pretty exciting project. So I'm just here to introduce it and then answer any questions that folks might have. But Nick's the guy that's going to talk to you about the details of the project. So Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Davia just shared my screen.
Yep, I can see it. It's on the, it's before you hit slideshow. There you go.
All right. Good morning, everyone. As Davia and Mark mentioned, Nick Myatt, East Region Manager for ODF&W, and pretty excited to have the opportunity to present this project to y'all today. Hopefully I will do my best to cruise through this and meet time. I can talk for a long time about this exciting project, but as Mark mentioned, we are in the process of working on a potential land acquisition that we know is the Minum River Wildlife Area, a little over 15,000 contiguous acres in Wallowa and Union County in Northeast Oregon. The ground is currently, it's currently managed by Hancock Natural Resources Group, which is a TIMO, which stands for Timber Investment Management Organization. And if you're not familiar with that, they basically hold forest land holdings for investment purposes for groups of investors. So it's managed by Hancock, but there's individual investment ownership. And they do have a short-term investment horizon, creating a very high potential for future subdivision of this property into all the way down to 240 acre parcels. So we have partnered with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation through their lands program, and moving forward with pursuing an acquisition of this project. And I did see Bill Richardson, the conservation program manager with Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, is on with us today, who is their lead on this project. So I wanted to take a moment to introduce you, walk you through this map. I know it's probably small on your screen and a little complicated, but if you look in the upper part of the map, you can see Highway 82. If any of you have ever traveled to Wallowa County from LeGrand to, say, Enterprise or Joseph, as you come into Wallowa County and you come down the Minam grade, the real steep hill with the sharp turn, beautiful view up towards the Eagle Cap Wilderness, looking across the river at Elk on that hillside. Basically everything you're looking at from that Minam grade and across at that hillside is the property that we're pursuing. This property is located right at the confluence of the Minam River and the Wallowa Rivers. And I'll walk you through this map. The yellow on the map is the existing ODF&W Minam River Wildlife Area. I think we own about 400 acres right along the highway and the river there. The area that show up on this map in pink is the property that we're trying to acquire. There's a two-phased acquisition, as you can see on the map, with phase one being the northern about third of the property at 4,609 acres, and phase two being the southern two-thirds at just under 11,000 acres. Some other important features to note at the bottom of the map in green, you can see the property shares a little over 5 miles of boundary with the Wallowa Whitman National Forest. And of that, about 2.5 miles are Eagle Cap Wilderness boundary. So pretty unique to have a private parcel sharing a boundary with wilderness area. Then moving to the north end of the property, in blue is the Oregon Parks and Rec Department Minam State Recreation Area. And then further north of that along the river is BLM land. If you know the Minam Station at the park there, is a very popular recreation tourism location where many people put in for float trips down the river. So now I'm going to move on to some of the conservation features and priority. With such a large contiguous tract, we have a high variety of habitat types. And this list on the right is all of our strategy habitats that are identified in the Oregon's conservation strategy. And then I also just put a sample of some of the conservation strategy species that have been observed in the area of this property. You see just a lot of our priority species identified in the strategy. Then as far as federal and state listed species, with the Minam River flowing for approximately 6 miles through the property and over 100 miles of perennial and ephemeral streams on the property, we have a lot of spring Chinook, salmon, we have steelhead populations, bull trout, as well as the tribe's been working on some releases of lamprey right in this area as well. The property is a very important winter range for mule deer and Rocky Mountain elk moving out of the Eagle Cap Wilderness onto this property. And the other key feature I really like to highlight is the context of wildlife corridor with this property. It's kind of fun if you go on Google Earth and you look at the connectivity for genetic flow and species movement between the Rocky Mountains and the Cascades. A lot of that linkage is through the Blue Mountains and the Wallowa Mountains. And then as you zoom in at closer scale, that point of connectivity between the Wallowa Mountains and the Blue Mountains, really the only place where there's forested habitats that connect those two mountainous areas is through this property in that river corridor. So very high importance linkage point. And as we face climate change and having adaptability of species and that movement genetic flow, I think this is definitely a high priority for us and meets one of the actions that is identified in our agency's climate plan. So beyond the conservation features of the property, very high use, high opportunity outdoor recreation point for both consumptive and non-consumptive outdoor recreation. One of the key features that's really unique with this property is the historic Minam River Trail. Used to start in that old town site of Minam and travel up the river, I believe like 58 miles or so upriver, and connect in with the entire trail system associated with the Eagle Cap Wilderness. And that remnants of that trail are still there and used, but it's not a very high use area anymore. So with this project, we're really looking to further develop that parking and trailhead, and would like to pursue putting in a suspension bridge for hiking and horse across the river, so you don't have to start your trip by wading a river that can be pretty dangerous at times. We think it just really provides greater accessibility to outdoor recreation for Oregonians, where you can access that right off of a major paved highway, instead of having to use like a high clearance or four-wheel drive vehicle to get up into most of the trailheads in our area. I wanted to touch on management real quick of what we envision for the property. The greatest need right now is just habitat protection of this property, but there are definitely some habitat improvement and enhancement opportunities. There are some weeds and invasive annual grasses that are coming in. We do have some opportunity for improving wildlife habitat through active forest habitat management. And there's some real good opportunities for aquatic in-stream type habitat restoration as well. We do envision kind of a working lands approach where we utilize grazing to improve forage conditions, and like I mentioned, use active forest management is a tool to improve some features related to wildlife habitat. But after acquisition takes place, we will then move into a public process with developing our area management plan that would go through public meetings and eventually go to the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission for approval. Just a quick note on our timelines. So as I said, there's two phases. Our first phase for this year, we're in the middle of our due diligence. We've already done an appraisal and title search, and starting to do some of the final due diligence pieces. As Commissioner Labhart mentioned, we've been meeting with elected officials over the last month to month and a half, and have just heard really nothing but support, which is, it's a great thing for the momentum of this project. We're scheduled in July to take this project forward to the Public Lands Advisory Committee for the state of Oregon. And then finally in August, the acquisition would go forward to the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission for final consideration and approval, with us moving forward with the phase 1 acquisition. And then we would go through a similar process in late 22 or early 23 for the phase 2 acquisition. And the final piece I want to touch on is just funding. We have 3 primary funding sources for the property. The first being Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, very generous private donations, at this point totaling $5.15 million coming from RMEF. We're in the process of developing a Forest Legacy Program grant for $9.7 million. If you're not familiar with Forest Legacy, it's a national level grant opportunity through the USDA Forest Service. The funding comes through the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which I believe ties back to taxes from offshore oil drilling. So we are working with the Oregon Department of Forestry to apply for those funds. And the third primary funding source, department has dedicated $3.1 million of the Pittman-Robertson dollars that we get each year through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and this is an excise tax on the purchase of guns and ammunition. So at this point for phase one, I have on here a total unknown amount of about $750,000. We are waiting to hear on a $500,000 grant that we've applied for through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And then we're also working with several partners as well on closing that gap on funding. So total price tag of $18.7 million for the acquisition. And that was a very quick shotgun approach to exciting acquisition that, and I failed to mention earlier on that this particular property, the department has been working in different fits and starts for several decades on acquiring. So really excited to be able to present this to you today. And Davia, if we have time, Commissioner Labhart and I could take any questions.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. There are some questions in the chat box or perhaps comments. Do you want to read those or do you want me to read them out for you?
Well, this is Mark. I saw the one from Peggy, so I could address that, Peggy. Yes, you're right. Most time county commissioners do have issues with acquiring private property. And I just want to thank the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation for their efforts in working through this, particularly Bill Richardson. His efforts have just been outstanding. But to specifically address Peggy's question, we did meet with all 3 county commissioners in Wallowa County, and because that's where the majority of the property is. There's only about 15 acres that's in Union County, but did meet with them also. But all 3 county commissioners in Wallowa County support this project. We will be paying in lieu of taxes, and that's where the state doesn't pay taxes on property, but as been the history of the department that has acquired property from private property owners, the department does pay in lieu of taxes. So the county will not lose any of their property tax revenue as a result of this acquisition. Also got, I don't, Nick, you can correct me if I'm wrong, and I think Shannon might still be on, but I don't recall where we've had any negative from state senators, state representatives, legislative committee chairs that we've talked to so far. All have been supportive of this effort. So I think we're on a pretty good pathway here to hopefully move this thing along. It's pretty cool.
Yes, nothing to add. It's been, we've met with a lot of the groups that have raised concern in the past with private land going to public land ownership, and we probably met with I think 14 different legislators now, and like Commissioner Labhart said, we've had really no significant concerns, and almost everyone we've talked to has been supportive of what we're trying to do. And I think it just kind of shows the uniqueness of this piece of property, and a lot of folks have said that they just think this needs to be in public ownership and available for Oregonians to use into perpetuity.
Nick, there was a question about the total cost of the property.
Right now, we're basing it off of a appraisal that's been conducted, and anticipated total cost is $18.7 million. And a lot of that cost, I mean, obviously the scale of the property, but about 6 miles of river frontage on both sides of the Minam River, and the potential for development and subdivision of that is really what drives a lot of the price. Davia, I see that Mark Hingham is with us today and raised his hand, and I do want to acknowledge Mark. Probably before I was graduated from high school, has put a large amount of effort and energy into acquisition tips on this project over the years. But it looks like Mark has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I just wanted to share my enthusiasm about this, and as you mentioned, I had the privilege of working several different times trying to get interest in this project, as well as there have been some other conservation groups that have tried. And so I think the important thing is that, as you mentioned, there's just been great support now, and there has been in the past. Typical with a lot of land acquisitions that the department's been involved with, sometimes you hit a bump in the road and it doesn't happen. And we came really close to buying this one other time in the past and it didn't happen. And so this is, in my view, a really big deal for the department. And if you look at the other wildlife areas just in Northeast Oregon, you begin to realize that we've managed to buy properties in places that wildlife they want to be there, and they're just really critical. And sometimes we forget how critical they are. The best part about this is that, as you mentioned, when you come around the corner and pull off the road, here you are in what's now going to be the largest wildlife area that the department owns. And so, just from the PR, that's great. And from the wildlife perspective and the fish perspective, it's outstanding. And that now, if you look at the long history of the Eagle Cap Wilderness, starting in 1930 with the primitive area, there have been additions to that all the way down to the boundary that you showed. And that was in '84, the Oregon Wilderness Act. And it would have gone further down the drainage had that been possible. And so the dream and the view was, let's try to protect this entire river corridor. And I think except for just a short section, tiny section of the river, this will happen. And so I had the privilege of working on this area several times. And I think one winter I worked in that area was the deepest snow year in 50 years. And the amount of wildlife on this property was incredible. And the corridor effect of that was really evident in that the winter got really tough, and elk and deer had to migrate even down that corridor you mentioned. And so we don't always see that every year, but it's just one of those places that we should own. And I really am excited and appreciate your work and Commissioner Labart's work. And we just want to say that if there's any help you need, let me know. And hopefully everyone will encourage other people to support it. So thanks for all your work.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, we're running a bit behind, so I think we probably will wrap this one up. If there are other questions for Nick or Commissioner Labhart, you can reach out to them or me, and I can connect you if those come up. But you'll be seeing more about this as the process moves forward. Thanks, Commissioner Labhart. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And then our next item is Emily Van Wyck, who is ODF&W's Sensitive Species Coordinator. She's going to talk about the new iNaturalist project that she has put together, and an exciting opportunity for the department as well. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Davia. I'm going to figure out how to share my screen. My slides are not as pretty as Nick's, but they will give you something to look at that's not my face. So let's see if we can get that shared. We got that? Cool. All right, so good morning. My name is Emily Van Wyck, and I am ODF&W's Strategy Species Coordinator. So as Davia said, she invited me here today to talk about a new effort that the conservation program has been engaging in through iNaturalist, and to speak a little bit about how we've used this platform to engage new communities that we might not typically reach through our other outreach efforts, and successful ways that we're already using data collected through this application to enhance the efficacy of some of our ongoing conservation projects. So iNaturalist, if you're not familiar, is an online social platform where users can share biodiversity data. It's pretty straightforward. So you go out, you take a picture or sound clip of an organism, upload it to the website, and then discuss your findings with other folks on this platform. So it's also a crowdsourced species identification system, as well as an organism occurrence database. So you can use this to record your own observations, get help with your identifications, and collaborate with others to collect this kind of biodiversity data. So you can use it to run bioblitzes or species-specific monitoring efforts or site-specific data collection. And then you can use it to access the observational data that's already housed within this database that's been collected by other iNaturalist users. So iNaturalist houses a vast database of species observation data. It's This is a dated slide, and about a month ago, we had 120,000 observations just of amphibians, birds, reptiles, and mammals in Oregon, and now we've added another 5,000 to that. Now there's 665 species of those taxa that have been documented in our state through this platform, and almost 8,000 unique observers who have contributed their data. So this is an incredible resource for us, as you can imagine. Understanding and monitoring the current status and distribution of species in our state is really critical in implementing successful conservation efforts and preserving biodiversity, but we and partner agencies, including you guys, oftentimes don't have the capacity to get out into every corner of the state and survey. So getting to engage with this community science platform helps us be more effective. And that's why we jumped in here and decided that we wanted to develop our own project within this platform, which is Oregon Wildlife Conservation. So this is our splash screen that you find when you go through iNaturalist to our project. And we developed this to help connect these community scientists who are out there observing wildlife in Oregon with biologists through this platform. So this is a traditional project within iNaturalist. Users can choose to join us and share their data through this platform. This is a bridge that really allows those users to directly share sensitive data with us. Each member that we have as a part of this project is a direct result of targeted outreach efforts. So this isn't a project where, if you're familiar with iNaturalist, sometimes you can just gather all of the data. This is one where we're specifically going out to unique observers and asking for their information and outreaching in other ways to try and encourage them to engage with us. And that allows them to share these sensitive data points that are otherwise hidden. And I can explain a little bit about that. And talk about observation geoprivacy. So as you can imagine, if you have this online database with geospatial data on sensitive species, that can get a little dangerous. So imagine you have a population of beautiful orchids out there and you have a data point that says exactly where they are and exactly how to get there. That population isn't going to last long. And so iNaturalist obscures data for these sensitive species in order to protect them. So up here, I have on the left, I have open observation. That's what most observations are going to look like. You can see the exact point that the person found this species, and that data is available for all. And so that's going to be for species that are safe to have that data shared. For species like Oregon spotted frog, you'll see on the right, we have an obscured data point. And so that point is going to be randomly projected within an area of about 22 by 22 kilometers squared. And that for us is not specific enough for our uses. And so by creating this project that we use, Oregon Wildlife Conservation, these observers who are using iNaturalist can share their true data points with us so we can use those data points in our efforts. So the benefits to this community-driven data collection effort and engaging with the iNaturalist platform to me are really twofold. So the first is that we get access to data in areas that we might not be able to survey. So volunteers can go in, send in data from any time and any place, and don't have the same constraints as professional biologists do. With validation and review of these data points, we can get really useful novel data that can contribute to our database. And they can collect a huge volume of data that can help us fill in gaps in our understanding of these species. So in addition to access to data, I think this is an opportunity for us to engage directly with the general public. So this is an awesome opportunity for us to do more science communication. Oftentimes you have people who are interested in finding out about the places around them. And this is a great opportunity for us to engage with those new communities in science and conservation and help them learn more about what it means to be a scientist. So one of the strengths of this particular community science platform, there are a lot of platforms like this, like eBird, I'm sure you're familiar with. The strength in this particular one is its accessibility to a wide audience. So you don't really need to know what an animal or a track or a sound is to contribute valuable information and take an active role in conservation. So this is accessible to all skill levels. In a lot of ways, I think this is empowering and hopefully can be a way to spark interest in new user groups and encourage new folks to be actively invested in conservation. So if you didn't grow up outside identifying wildlife, or if you don't have a mentor to help teach you, it's very similar to hunting. It's intimidating to get started. And this is just one tool that we can use to help break down some of those barriers, engage new conservationists, and have more people who are invested in the wildlife in our state. Also through this platform, these users can directly communicate with us and other experts in the field on their observations. That opportunity is not easy to come by otherwise. And so that's something that's really cool. For taxa that I'm not familiar with, it's really fun to be able to talk to someone who's an expert in odes and ask about dragonflies and learn more about that. So
Hey, Emily.
Go for it.
Are your slides advancing?
Are they not?
We're still on observation geoprivacy, just so you know.
We can look at this frog. Can you see the frog now, Shannon?
You can see the frog. Thanks.
Excellent. That might be more exciting to look at. I appreciate you noticing and stopping me. So let's talk about some specific examples how we're using this data. So there are a couple different projects that we have going on where we're already using iNaturalist data. One of these is Foothill yellow-legged frogs. So if you look at this picture, you can see a frog looks a lot like a rock. Foothill yellow-legged frogs are a species that is a conservation strategy species, and it's currently under review for federal listing. So we have Jade Keaton down in southwestern Oregon, who's working on a project to better map the current distribution of this species in their core range. This is a species that has an obscure geoprivacy setting, and there are observations that are on iNaturalist. So she reached out to a lot of users through this platform to try and get access to those data points. And she was able to get 19 new observation locations from the iNaturalist data. So here we have all of the observations that we have in the state on iNaturalist for Foothill yellow-legged frog, and she's able to communicate with these folks, gain access to their points, and then those observations that she gleaned from iNaturalist user-submitted data helps us, it contributes to the current understanding of their occupancy and allows us to focus efforts in areas of the historic range where no data exist to describe their current presence. So this helps us be more efficient, creates a better product, and engages more folks in this. Foothill yellow-legged frogs are a great candidate for this because they are readily identifiable by photograph, as you just saw, and the level of specificity needed for the data for this project isn't high. Another project that we're using this data on is the Oregon Connectivity Assessment and Mapping Project. So this is modeling connectivity for 54 species from 5 different taxa. And iNaturalist data is going to be used to help validate models. So these data points help ensure that the models that are built are accurate representations of real-world habitat use and movement. And then individual species maps will be compiled to identify high priority wildlife corridors throughout the state that would most benefit from conservation action. So iNaturalist is just one example of how digital platforms and communication have really allowed for the sharing of data in a way that's never before been possible. The data exists out there and it's being collected in this very spontaneous way. This is something that can help us as conservationists and biologists to better achieve our goals, and it makes learning about the natural world and contributing to stewardship much more accessible to a more broad, diverse audience. So more use of this platform is something that can benefit all of us on this call. So please help us get out the word. You can run your own iNaturalist projects or encourage folks to submit data to ours. Data points, if they're uploaded into iNaturalist, can be used by just about anyone. We're also developing a flyer to post at trailheads to encourage folks to document wildlife on their hikes. So if you know of any spots that we can post this, or you would like some copies, we'd be happy to share once that's completed. So we've been working to get out this message and could absolutely use your help. If there are any ways that you could see us collaborating or working together to make this a more effective tool for wildlife conservation in Oregon, I'd love to chat further and hear ideas from folks.
Thanks, Emily. Christine says this is a great opportunity for STEP volunteers, which is a great connection to make.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments for Emily?
Tried to get us back on schedule. How did I do?
Doing very well, I think.
All right.
Yeah, this is Shannon. Just real quick. Great presentation, Emily. Thanks. I'm just curious, do you have a sense of how many data points we've acquired so far from iNaturalist or eBird or any other?
I sure do. So if I scroll fast enough, I think I pulled this yesterday. So we have about 35,000 observations, give or take. Some of these were available to us before, so they weren't obscured. But then I would guess a couple thousand are new data points that we have access to for these sensitive species. Each one of them is really exciting and is incredibly helpful. But I would have to do some digging to figure out exactly how many were obscured that folks were willing to share with us.
And Shannon, this is Andrea Hansen, Conservation Strategy Coordinator. To answer your eBird question, in terms of community science, we have more than 100,000, far more, hundreds of thousands of eBird points. So we use a lot of community science data for our conservation strategy prioritizations and focusing conservation efforts, and in our OCAMP connectivity analyses. So if every organization can help promote these community science efforts or develop bioblitzes, it helps the agency a lot in successfully conserving these species. And the reason why we're also pushing iNaturalist, because eBird obviously is just birds, so we're really trying to get more information on mammals, reptiles, and amphibians through iNaturalist. So we're really promoting both platforms.
Great, thank you both.
Great, thanks so much, Emily. Our next agenda item is Pam Slaughter from People of Color Outdoors. And I'd say Pam is our first volunteer to lead an agenda item from outside ODF and W. So thank you for that, Pam. And her agenda item is the surprising history of places. You're on mute, Pam.
Okay. You hear me now? Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm Pam Slaughter, with the founder of People of Color Outdoors. And for those of you who don't know People of Color Outdoors, I started this group in 2017. And after I had, a few years before, I had had some incidents on the trail where I was verbally threatened and surrounded and just kind of bullied by some racists. And it wasn't just a single incident, but that was the one that kind of got me to thinking about finding a way to go outside with other people of color and hike with people of color. So I actually ended up starting Outdoor Afro Portland, and I did that for a while, a couple of years. And when I stopped, I decided to start a different group because a lot of people who weren't Black wanted to join our group because they were also having problems being harassed when they were out in nature, and they didn't feel safe going out for a hike with their families and friends. So they wanted to go in a group setting. So I started the group, and along the way, I found a really wonderful place that a lot of you might be familiar with, Oxbow Park. And so this, what I'm going to tell you, is basically a story that I learned about Oxbow Park. And that is that Estella Ellaby, she was the first Black superintendent of parks with Multnomah County. And this was back in the 70s, before Metro was managing the parks. Well, Estella Ellaby, in a nutshell, she basically disrupted a long-standing policy that Oxbow Park had with that Multnomah County had with the Bureau of Land Management. And that was, if the Bureau of Land Management felt that there were old growth trees that needed to be removed from Oxbow Park, Multnomah County had an understanding with them that they could do that. They could just remove those trees. And it might be that the trees were looking sick, or they may have been leaning on another tree. It may have fallen, or big branches may have fallen off of it and it looked damaged. But for whatever reason, if they felt that a tree needed to be removed from the old growth forest, they were allowed to remove that tree. Well, Estella Ellaby absolutely loved trees. All these pictures are in Oxbow Park, by the way. And she just stopped that policy. She just stopped it. And so this old growth forest at Oxbow Park has not been touched for 50 years. You all probably really appreciate that more than the average person would. That 92 acres of old growth would actually be untouched for 50 years. And you can imagine the difference between the forest. If you had two exact forests and one had been periodically having trees removed over a period of 50 years and one hadn't, there'd be quite a difference in the wildlife and the plants that are there. So I was very surprised to find that this woman, Estella Ellaby, had made such a difference at this beautiful park. People of Color Outdoors, one of the things that I've been doing is getting us out to Oxbow Park probably 4 or 5 times a year. I think it's important when you have people who have been traumatized, and even if they haven't, even if they've just heard stories about scary things that have happened to other Black, Indigenous, and people of color outdoors in nature, you hear these scary things and it makes you not want to go. And we've all heard these things, real stories like mine and other stories that happen to other people. You can see here where the little arrow is moving that the Metro Purse, this is a Metro Nature Guide, and that is a picture of Estella Ellaby, and she's sharing the story of Estella Ellaby with us. When we go to Oxbow Park, we also do a land acknowledgement to think about and talk about the different tribes that used to live in the area. But another thing about Oxbow Park that's really special is the Sandy River borders, or the Sandy River runs through it, and the Sandy River is one of the last few wild rivers in the country. It's a river where salmon still run, and this was traditionally a very important place before it was a park. It was a very important place, and Indigenous people came from all over, not just the region, but even from other areas. They would travel for days to come to the area that is now Oxbow Park, and they would hang out all summer, hunting, fishing, drying the fish, networking. It was a very important kind of business center, and people would be there all summer long, working, storing food, packing it up, and then they would leave in the fall, or they would stay until the fall when the big salmon run came, and then they would leave. So it was a very important place. And it still is. In September, you can still go there, and Indigenous people do host salmon education and salmon tasting times. So look for that. Now you get to see us at Oxbow Park having a good time. If you haven't had an opportunity to go to Oxbow Park, definitely do it. It's just such a beautiful place. One of thousands of beautiful places in Oregon. When people first come, sometimes they're a little hesitant. They don't know what they're going to what to expect. They don't know who's going to be there, and everyone is interested and curious about coming, but they don't really know. So there's a little edge of wariness at first. Excitement and wariness. The nature education guide shares about different kinds of mushrooms, oyster mushrooms, lion's head mushrooms. We saw all kinds of things out there. Can you see this little trail on the bottom? So that is one of the trails that we're taking to get to the ancient forest section. This little one, kind of typical when people first come, they're a little nervous at first. She didn't want to take off her coat. She hung on to her mom. Then after a little while, she started to feel a little more comfortable. When I made her our hike leader, she really let her hair down. People are really surprised to find out about the different textures and different kinds of mosses and ferns and things that are out there. And it actually ends up being very interesting. And when we go on subsequent hikes, people are rushing forward to say, oh, I know what that is. And it's pretty exciting to them. The more often we go, the more familiar people are, the more comfortable and safe they feel, the more included they feel like it's their space. And at this point, we've been there so many times that if someone does get confronted or verbally attacked or if something terrible happens on a trail, they're not going to assume that they shouldn't go to Oxbow Park, because we've been there so often that we know it's not the park, it's not the location. We just might have some bad timing. It still doesn't take the trauma and the upset out of these kind of encounters, but it helps when you know for a fact that it's not the place. The place is okay. And so that's one of the reasons why People of Color Outdoors goes, we go to new places, but we go to the same place quarterly. We have several places that we go to over and over. And it's part of an intentional plan to take the fear out of leaving the neighborhood and going somewhere else and walking in real woods. Might sound simple to people that do it all the time, but it's very scary to some people. What's exciting for me is I am starting to see people now after 3 years of going and going and going. I have actually been to Oxbow and run into people that I have introduced to Oxbow. So that, for me, that is coming full circle. It's like, okay, you're doing it. You're doing what you're supposed to do. How am I doing on time?
Just fine. Maybe
Okay.
5 more minutes.
Okay. And sorry, I love these little and so these are, again, people that were a little nervous at first, and they got really playful. Came in kind of tired and burdened and concerned about things that had nothing to do with hiking, and left feeling playful and light. This is just some of the beauty in the Old Growth area. And now we're walking along the ridge, looking down at the river. And I'm going to continue with the pictures, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Thanks, Pam, so much for sharing the surprising history, but also a little bit of the story of what you do. And it's such an incredible opportunity for young people to go with you and have that experience and grow from there. And I was seeing connections between what Emily was talking about and all these photos that you have, an opportunity for people to get to that place where they know what they're seeing because they've shared on iNaturalist and talked to an expert about what they're seeing. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. We also,
oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to very quickly say, we have a geologist that comes out with us sometimes, and he showed us where, you know, the creation of the Sandy River, when the volcano blew millions of years ago, that the ash covered the area that is now Oxbow Park. And so there's a forest 60 feet under Oxbow Park. Well, there's an area at the very end of Oxbow where you launch your boats from. If you look east, stand at the beach and look east, you can see what looks like a dirt hill with big old sticks sticking out. Those are the treetops from a long time ago when the volcano blew. The treetops that came up more than 60 feet. So the rest of the forest is 60 feet under Oxbow Park, but you can see the treetops that are still coming up through the ash in that one section. So that's something to look for when you're there.
And Pam, I thought you should know, I don't know if you can see the chat, that Bill Weiler from the Sandy River Watershed Council is on. And I didn't know this, but Bill was apparently the Oxbow Park supervisor in the 80s. And he was asking you when Miss Ellenby changed the county's policy.
In the 70s.
So if you two haven't met, that's a great opportunity for you guys to talk about that.
Yeah, and her daughter is actually one of our members. So she's able to share information whenever we go to Oxbow Park. Of course, we talk about Estella Ellaby. And yeah, I would love to talk to you sometime, and maybe you can come out with us and talk to us about Oxbow, and meet Angela Ellaby. This is her right here.
Awesome. And then you also have a thanks from Mark Webb for sharing this story.
Thank you. And these are just spontaneous pictures. No one told them to hold their hands up. But people tend to do that at the end. All right. Now I'm just looking at random pictures.
Thank you so much, Pam, for this story and for sharing your time with us.
You're welcome.
So that is the end of our formal agenda. And I will share sort of my last slide here. Our next conservation open house is July 13th, and the other dates for this year at the bottom here in September and November. We already have Defenders of Wildlife signed up to lead a discussion on the 30 by 30 initiative, which hit the news last week again with the initial report from the Department of Interior and Department of Agriculture on the 30 by 30 initiative led by the Biden administration. And we also have Jim Cathcart and Jason Facera signed up to talk about the wildlife habitat tax deferral programs. Are there other topics that people are interested in talking about in July?
Maybe status of Oregon conservation grants, strategy grants.
Sure, through the Conservation and Recreation Fund.
Yes.
Okay. Other topics? Update on recovering. Thanks, Marcia. Hopefully by July, we'll have all of our members signed on as co-sponsors to recovering due to all of your efforts. I will stop sharing, and if there's any other topics of interest, timely updates from your organizations that you'd like to share, now's the time. I see Steph Noel, you have your hands up.
Hi, and sorry I don't have my camera set up for this meeting, but I'm Stephanie with the Oregon Trails Coalition, and I just wanted to share with everyone that our call for session proposals for the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Summit is open through June 4th, and I'll drop that link into the chat. But just really interested in proposals from folks working at the intersection of conservation and outdoor recreation. Our key theme for this year's summit is making sure that recovery in outdoor recreation in Oregon communities is sustainable and equitable. So kind of focusing on recovery and not getting back to where we were before, but being kind of future oriented of what do we want the future to look like. So I will drop a link where folks can find more summit information and info about our request for proposals, but folks are welcome to reach out to me if they have further questions about it.
Thanks, Steph. And is that COVID recovery, fire recovery, or all recovery?
Yeah, looking at it from a COVID, wildfire, et cetera, perspective.
2020 recovery.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Any other updates from the group? Okay, hearing none. Thank you all for your time. Hope this is a productive forum and opportunity. Hope you learned something new today. And we will see you again on July 13th. Thank you.
Thanks, Davia.